For decades, diesel has been the engine of India's road transport economy. But something is shifting. The conversations are no longer about if the industry transitions. It's about how fast, and more importantly, what do we transition to? My guest today has spent his entire career right at the center of that complexity. Vinayak Thalange is Director of Engine and Driveline at Volvo Trucks Technology and Industrial Division. Instead, there's more, of this multi-fuel mobility, buzzword that's going on. So, what does that mean?
Multi-fuel, as I said, it's a portfolio and it's a deliberate strategy, I would say, to decarbonize the transport and considering real-world constraints. Multi-fuel strategy is not offering everything everywhere. I think it's about the right energy carrier, going in right use case, geographical needs, customer reality, and at the end, economics of it. Definition is consistent with what we do as Volvo and our long-term pathway towards 100% fossil-free vehicles by 2040. We call it as three-pronged strategy, technical paths: battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and combustion engine that runs on renewable fuels like bio-LNG, hydrogen, HVO, etc. So it's matching energy carrier to the right use case, I would say.
India specific, how do you expect the powertrain landscape to look like in the next 5-10 years?
I would call it as a additive transition in India in different powertrains, and then these different powertrains will grow alongside diesel.
If this conversation sparked questions for you about your fleet, about your powertrain strategy, or where India's CV industry is headed, so welcome back to CV Talks, the official podcast series of the team at Commercial Vehicle Forum, or as we are more popularly known, CVF. We are now just about a month away from our landmark 10th edition of CVF on 10th of June at the Conrad in Pune. And as we count down, we are having conversations with some of the sharpest minds in the commercial vehicle sector, and the people who are shaping the future of this industry. I'm Rohit Dewan, the portfolio director of CVF, and today's episode is one that I've genuinely been looking forward to. For decades, diesel has been the engine of India's road transport economy, and this is quite literally. But something is shifting. The conversations I'm having with fleet operators, with the OEMs, with the policymakers, are no longer about if the industry transitions. It's about how fast, and more importantly, what do we transition to? Because the answer isn't simply electric; it's LNG, CNG, hydrogen, electric, and the question of which technology fits which use case is genuinely complex. My guest today has spent his entire career right at the center of that complexity. Vinayak Thalange is Director of Engine and Driveline at Volvo Trucks Technology and Industrial Division. And what I find particularly interesting about Vinayak is that he's been writing and speaking about the diesel versus electric question for nearly a decade now. So he's someone who understands both the global technology roadmap and the very specific realities of the Indian market. Vinayak, it's great to have you at CV Talks. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit, and then thanks for introduction as well. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and then be in touch with you so far. Yeah, like you mentioned, the complexity, and I've been in the space for a while. One of reason behind that is thing that I like to work with complex things and situations and technology, of course. And what can be more complex than an engine? So, been fascinated with engines for since a kid. Again, not specific thing with only me, but many of us are really looking after different engines and different things that are happening in automobile and be fascinated with it. So I'm just one of them for sure. Then being here, it's just happened. So coming out of college, I joined automotive company, and then things just fell in line, and then I just took it as it came. Sometimes opportunities came before my time as well, and then lucky to have leaders and mentors who encourage to take the challenges, of course, and guided. Yeah, so I'm here, and as it goes, some people like to they are good at art, some kind of art. It could be different types. Some people are good at sports and things. For me, what excites is to work with technology, and it gives
Okay.
me a lot of energy. And that's something, if it moves and then it's engine, then definitely I'm up for it. So that's what I'm here today.
Okay, great. Thanks for the introduction and giving us insight as to why you're in this role and how you got into this role at Volvo, and you've been doing it for quite some time now. And
Yeah.
while I was doing my research on kind of the questions and what kind of
Mm.
inputs we need from you, I came across some writing of yours that you had done around the diesel versus electric question. I think on LinkedIn or somewhere you had shared
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the first question I wanted to ask you straight was, now what's different today compared to say 5 years or 10 years ago, maybe when you wrote that article? Is
Mm.
the industry at a genuine turning point, in terms of when it comes to this whole transition,
Mm.
the powertrain transition? Or is this a conversation that's still ahead of its time for India? What do you think?
That's a good question. If I reflect on what you said about a decade back and all, the article that I wrote on LinkedIn was really, I think, a decade back when Tesla came up with their semi truck, and then I was fascinated. I mean, 100 years of technology in place, and suddenly, what is this? So I thought of giving a chance at it to see how it compares. But then, if I start by saying that 5 years ago, the direction was right, or maybe we were thinking in the right direction, I would say, but system wasn't ready. So at that time, discussions were around moving away from diesel, were largely conceptual, because technologies existed, but then a lot of different things were not there in place. For example, fuel availability, infrastructure, policy, clarity. We know that okay, something is coming up, but not so clear about it. And of course, not to discount economics, since we are talking about commercial vehicles there, it was not somehow aligned. And then for India, diesel remained unmatched in reliability, cost, and scale for a long time, and still it is. So back then, customers viewed alternatives at pilot or sometimes as CSR project,
Okay.
uh, but not business decisions. Because of simple math in the context of India, these powertrains carried high capex premiums with not so clear and credible TCO parity with diesel back then. And then the fleet operators in India, we have very fragmented industry in that segment that operates. They had no incentive to move. So yeah, means it was there, but then system wasn't ready, I would say.
Okay.
And then coming back to what's there today, what's different today, it changed big time. And then like multiple barriers that were there 5-10 years ago, they started falling in place at the same time. So that's where is the shift, I think, is happening, and quite fast. To start with, maybe if I would reflect policy, like I mentioned,
Okay.
it was signaling back then. Okay, this is the direction, this is how it can happen, etc. But now it is moving from signaling to execution there. So, for example, we have good example of ethanol blending. So, 20% ethanol blending in petrol powered engines or powered vehicles. That was quite ahead of schedule. So the policy existed, but then it was moved into execution quite fast, and then we are actually moving, bringing it ahead of planned time. So that definitely is falling in line. Secondly, about technology. Technology existed, as I said, but then system was not there, and then technology in bits and pieces, it matured in portfolio. For example, if I quote Volvo, what we do is we are not betting on one winner. We have
Okay.
multiple viable pathways, and that's what I call it as. I would like to call it as a portfolio. We have sustainable fuels like LNG, bio LNG, etc. Hydrogen that can work in internal combustion engines and fuel cell. We have option of battery electric vehicles, and of course, not to discount drop in renewable fuels. So there is a lot of portfolio now getting built around technology, and of course, it differs, and it should match the needed application that we talk about in commercial vehicles. So for India, it matters because the transition is not linear, or will not be linear. It will be heterogeneous. So that's where I feel 5 years ago, this portfolio logic wasn't there in industry.
Okay.
Policy was signaling, now it is execution. Now we moved from technology bits and pieces to wider portfolio options. Then, lastly, I would say in that context is about economic economics around this
Okay.
technology and its application. It was just a discussion back then. Now it entered a conversation because now people are asking, or customers are asking different type of question. For example, does this solution work commercially, rather than just speculating, this is not this is not the way, or do we really think, etc. But they are entering into conversation. Does this
Okay.
solution work commercially? And that shift didn't exist 5 years ago because of so many things. So this is critical change, I would say, and then this marks really a qualitative shift in
Okay.
mindset. So ecosystem is aligning, to summarize, and then system readiness under Indian conditions that simply didn't exist. Now I think it is coming to shape.
Okay. So now this powertrain transition that you're mentioning, that the multiple factors, right?
Mm.
So I want to ask you, in terms of what is this change being primarily driven by? So is it regulation? Is it customer demand? Is it technology? Is it sustainability commitment? I mean, are all four of them hitting at the same time, or is there like one particular thing you feel, okay, this is really one or two, like, this is really pushing the transition?
Mm, yeah, I think these are primary forces or enablers, or uh, forces basically around this. So in my opinion, the all four forces are hitting at the same time.
Okay.
And then that convergence is precisely what makes this moment different, fundamentally different from the
Okay.
past. Because these constraints that you mentioned, that previously sort of cancelled each other, but now they are reinforcing each other because of this
Okay.
shift. For example, if we talk about, you said about regulation, yes. So regulation, in a way, it always created sense of urgency in
Hmm.
past, and now also. Then you mentioned about customer demand, I guess. So customer demand, definitely it is the important force as others, but then it creates pull.
Hmm.
And then you mentioned about sustainability commitments. So there, I would say this is inevitable. We need to work towards sustainability so that our planet and our future generations, they get cleaner environment, and they get to enjoy the life. So this is
Sure.
inevitable. Then lastly, I think you mentioned about technology. So definitely, technology readiness creates its value, its credibility, I would say. So these all forces, one creates urgency, the other creates pull, the third one is inevitable, and then the technology for sure
Yeah.
brings credibility to all this. So these all forces are acting at the same time, I would say. And then if you consider them independently, I think they are not decisive.
Okay.
They are just pulling in different directions, but then together, I think I see they are creating a momentum, which is good. And that's why I see the shift that you asked about is, yes, the transition is shifted from uh, if alternate can work or not, but now it is the question being asked is where and how fast alternatives will scale. So it's right on time, I would say.
And if I kind of flip that question, that, in terms of which out of these forces you think is the most underrated at the moment?
Mm. Uh, yes, but like I said just before that, independently, if this force, if you call ask me, they will cancel. they will act
Okay.
against. So it's not one that we need all of them together so that
Okay.
we get the momentum.
Okay. Okay. And multi-fuel mobility is something
Mm.
that is a buzzword you keep hearing. You keep
Yes.
listening
Yeah,
in
yeah,
articles, at forums,
yeah.
what have you. And from where you sit at Volvo, how do you actually define that, right? And why is it becoming that kind of strategic response from not
Mm,
every OEM, not just like Volvo, even others, that
mm,
instead of just saying betting on one technology, okay, I'm putting all my eggs in one basket, this is going to work.
mm.
Instead, there's more, of this multi-fuel mobility, buzzword that's going on. So, what does that mean, when it comes to Volvo, at least? You know?
Mm. Yeah, firstly, it's not a buzzword. So sometimes it is called as a slogan as well, but I don't think so. It's not that. And even it's not, I feel it's not indecision as well. Because here we are talking about commercial vehicles. People, customers buy those commercial vehicles and then they run business out of it. We get necessary goods, our livelihoods delivered. So it's different altogether. And then the multi-fuel, as I said, it's a portfolio and it's a deliberate strategy, I would say, to decarbonize the transport and considering real world constraints, because then it's not just a hypothetical term or hypothetical portfolio created, but it's actually coincides with real world constraints. Uh, at Volvo, where I sit, and then how we work on it, we design vehicles and platforms and ecosystem uh, that are addressing different applications basically, and then we go with which energy carrier can help to address the business needs and at the same time work on this decarbonization aspect as well. So it's basically scaling in parallel and deployed where they make most sense. Uh, and then, like I said, multi-fuel strategy is not offering everything everywhere. I think it's about the right energy carrier going in right use case, geographical needs, customer reality, and at the end, economics of it. Then, lastly, I would say, and I may be repeating as well, but then this definition is consistent with what we do as Volvo and our long-term pathway towards 100% fossil-free vehicles by 2040. We call it as three-pronged strategy, technical paths: battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and combustion engine that runs on renewable fuels like bio LNG, hydrogen, HVO, etc. So it's matching energy carrier to the right use case, I would say. So it's not
Okay.
a buzzword. I think it's the way how we can decarbonize and maintain the business at the same time.
Okay. Okay. And so, a lot of times when I'm talking to fleet operators and, when the question of, this kind of powertrain transition comes up,
Mm.
they put it very simply, just tell me what to buy.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mm,
Now, do you think that there will be one winning technology, whether that's electric, hydrogen, or something else? Or is
mm,
the future genuinely going to be, multiple fuel platforms
mm,
coexisting depending on the application? Sort of like horses for courses, right?
mm, mm.
So what do you think?
I think it's a fair question that just tell me what to buy. And then that's where answer also lies in the question itself, because the context of question is different for each customer, if I would say. And then these different technologies will address those needs in different ways and in different point of time. uh, so logic is clear, like I said, that it based on energy needs, application, economics, and reality, ground reality, etc. So to elaborate a little bit, I would say, for example, battery electric vehicles, they can operate where energy efficiency and predictable routes exist. They dominate. So we know where to go, what is the infrastructure available. They are most efficient there. Hydrogen technologies where we need range, where we need uptime and fast refueling, so that can address those needs. And combustion engines running on renewable fuels, where it's intensive, infrastructure is a constraint, remote places. So it actually goes. We need to actually go into detail and a very specificity of application of particular customer, work with those needs, and bring out the right energy carrier that fits in all this math. So uh, so this multi-fuel thing that will avoid or help customers to avoid and answer some risk and questions. For example, standard investments they need to do, then this allows us to do phase transition where it matters, and of course it matches the technological maturity with operational reality. So what I would say is, when customers they feel protected, they move sooner. So we need to work with their risks and their needs so that they can accelerate the change.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of like you mentioned, like electric would kind of work in like a last mile kind of this thing where predictable routes, intercity routes, there's charging infrastructure and all of that.
Mm,
Now, but when we get specific about the biggest problem, which is your long haul heavy trucking, right?
mm,
High payload, long distances,
mm,
often remote routes.
mm,
When you look at options like LNG, hydrogen,
mm,
ICE,
mm,
electric, what's actually practical in the near term, and what does your own kind of roadmap say about this space? And the reason why I'm kind of putting this to you is because we saw some recent news
mm.
articles on Volvo's 700-kilometer electric range being broken.
Yeah.
The pilot you're doing with CJ Darcer, like that's another one that we read over the past month or so.
Mm,
So that's why I kind of wanted your view on that.
mm. Uh, Again, it's the same logic what we apply here as well. So we go with what is the need and available infrastructure also, because now we are talking about alternatives to diesel in this case, where the infrastructure is widely available, uptime is quite good. So we are not thinking to compete or replace one to one and go with one technology, one solution fits all. But then actually we go into details. For example, when I talk about LNG and bio LNG, it offers long range and faster refueling. Then impact on payload is also manageable, because then we are talking about tanks, not the heavy ones like batteries, but then comparable to diesel. So payload can be manageable. And technology is mature, it's already available. We have thousands of trucks around, I think if I say more than 10,000 trucks running on road with this application. So this will help in those kind of situation where we have infrastructure to fuel up with LNG or bio LNG. This can be a solution. At the same time, if there is infrastructure that can get access to uh, charging, and then also uh, it, it is like a captive energy source, green energy source that provides you charging infrastructure. So battery electric can also work. So it's not that the battery electric truck can solve everything, or a fuel cell electric truck can solve every problem. But then we need to see what is the need, look around infrastructure, the mission profiles of these applications, and then pick a right one that fits in, because at the end it needs to do the economic sense as well. Uh, then when it comes to fuel cell, I think it is really good when we consider deep decarbonization, because it's really long-term zero emission solution. It is good for very long distances, heavy payloads, regions where we have grid capacity constraints or accessibility constraints on charging. At the same time, the cost is and availability of hydrogen that also brings a constraint. So look at what is the need, look at infrastructure, look at what are the constraints in those energy carriers, and then we can derive an equation, and then comes the answer.
Okay. Okay. And I mentioned fleet operators earlier. There's a tension that comes up every time that I talk to them about there are more and more technology requirements. They
Mm,
have regulatory requirements, and that already that squeezes further on already on the thin margins that they have.
mm, mm, mm,
And while they say that they care about sustainability, they also care a lot about the margins, right? They
mm.
care more about the margins, right? Because that's how you run a successful business or
Yes.
profitable business. And often the perception is more greener is equal to more expensive.
Mm,
So
yeah.
how do you bridge that gap? Is there a genuine business case for green mobility today, or is it more driven still by mandate than economics?
Yes, it's honestly, I can say that the tension is very real, and frankly, it is right tension, because then that is where everything starts, and that is where everything is get decided. So, one point I would like to add there is this business case today is not green versus diesel. I think it should be, and it is the right energy carrier for right job and the right time. So when we look at this tension in the angle that I'm saying, that what is the energy carrier that does the
Okay.
right job, then I think we can demonstrate the sense of out of it. There are several examples already for battery electric trucks, for example, can be
Okay.
economically viable even today, in where we have predictable mission profiles, return to base operations, high utilization, and then, like I said, the captive or renewable energy access. So this is possible even with battery electric trucks as well, and we have been proven by using our products in our own logistic fleets. Then, when it comes to alternative fuels like LNG and bio LNG, it carries lower risk of decarbonization path. It offers decarbonization, but then with lesser risk, because fuel is available, quicker uptime, and meaningful CO2 reduction if we use. So it is green and economically viable, provided we have that kind of mission and network of fueling. Then at the same time, where there is a constraint on charging and then infrastructure, there we can work with this renewable drop-in fuels as well. So it is not green versus diesel and then calculations around it, but we should do the math around right energy carrier.
Okay.
Uh, then uh, our approach is simple, to simplify. This is very complex, I can tell you. When we get down to the specificities and start putting down the calculation, it definitely is complex, but then I think that is what we need to work with: complexity, and then bring it to the level that customers every understands the mathematics out of it, and then it starts making sense for them. So right energy, right job at right time. It's not that one size will fit all. So
Okay.
this is how we can bridge sustainability with real fleet economics. Otherwise, it will if we treat them independently, then they're very far away from each other. So we need to create a bridge through this complex calculations and explanations, and working with customers in detail. Previously, we had one diesel truck that can go anywhere and that can do any mission profile, one powertrain solution. But that situation will change. And then that is the bridge that we need to create.
Okay. Okay. And now I'll move on to the question that our audience would be most eager to hear about, which is India specific. How do you expect the powertrain landscape to look like in the next 5-10 years?
Mm, yeah, good question. If I had a crystal ball, I would give you right answer right away. Uh, One thing I see and I feel that diesels will not disappear in next 5 to 10 years in India, but it will not be only solution that is available for every application. That is even evident today. That shift is already underway. Uh, so I would say we will look at cleaner and more efficient combustion engines. Then battery electric vehicles will scale in urban and short haul return to base kind of applications. Gas solutions like LNG, bio LNG, or if made available CBG, it will increase to create that bridge for long haul. Then, but it will be still constrained by range and infrastructure. These solutions. Then, when it comes to hydrogen solutions, both ICE and fuel cell, I think it will remain a pilot and early commercial viability studies. Thanks to different initiatives by government like National Green Hydrogen Mission, where we could
Hmm.
test these kind of pilots nowadays, and infrastructure is made available. Ecosystem is conducive for these kind of things. So this will continue. We need to do these pilots and mature the ecosystem, not only technology in product, but then ecosystem as a whole. And then that's when national policy is coming into picture. So I feel it will diesels will not disappear, and also The transition for our country will be additive, not substitutive. We will keep on adding solutions as it get matured, as ecosystem gets matured, viable, and then we add that solution. So we go step by step. I think that's how it will be. So I would call it as a additive transition in India for in different powertrains, and then these different powertrains will grow alongside diesel. That is also will continue and grow in terms of volume, but then other solutions also will be joining it side by side, and then we replace route by route, application by application. So it will be additive transition.
And in terms of this transition, what do you think the industry is underestimating the most? It could be uh, the fleet operators, policymakers, OEM suppliers. What do you think they should be preparing for before it becomes urgent?
Mm, yeah, that's a good. But reflection on that, I think we can't afford underestimating any forces or any enablers or restraining factors in this case. So we need to join hands together. We need to partner, and that is what I think you are seeing happening everywhere, even in India. The partnerships are increasing because this is the problem that we need collective efforts to solve. So I think everyone in industry is recognizing these factors and then trying to uh, get ready by partnering with different ecosystem stakeholders, and that's why be ready when things are really get going or take the pace. So think we recognize that over a period of time that we need to work together. So like our CEO quotes, partnership is the new leadership. So I think it is no longer a quote, it's a fact, and then it's happening everywhere.
Absolutely. So, Vinayak, this has been a genuinely fascinating conversation. And I think what I'm taking away is that the future isn't one technology winning, it's about matching the right solution to the right application and making sure the economics follow. Right.
Yep.
And you spent years at the cutting edge of this transition, and I think our listeners, whether they are fleet operators, engineers, or policymakers, they'll find great value in what you've shared today. Thank you so much for joining us for CV Talks, and we hope to see you on the 10th of June at the Conrad in Pune and continue this conversation in person.
Hmm.
So that's a wrap on our episode 3 of CV Talks. If this conversation sparked questions for you about your fleet, about your powertrain strategy, or where India's CV industry is headed, bring those questions to CV of 2026. Join us on 10th of June at the Conrad in Pune for a full day of exactly such conversations, live, on stage, and with the people who are building this industry's future. Until then, we will keep the conversations going. Stay tuned for episode 4. And Vinayak, thanks so much for taking out the time for your busy schedule for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the platform. I think it's good to discuss about these topics with experts and, of course, customers, and everyone is a stakeholder in the end, because then we are talking about our future and our planet. So thanks for this platform, and then giving me opportunity to express my views. See you
Great.
in Pune then.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time.